Good morning. So today I will talk mostly about how corporates are working with startups, and a little bit about how startups can work with corporate too. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about who we are. I'm working for 500 Startup, who are the most active seed investor worldwide. In the last 7 years, we have invested in 1,800 companies across 60 countries. We currently have 330 million under management. Some example of company we invest in, you may have heard about Twilio. They just did the IPO last year in the NASDAQ, but as well as Grab in Southeast Asia, where I'm based, is a company with $1 billion valuation already, or Credit Karma as well. As you can see, we did several other investments who are quite huge. We call that like centers. They are company above 100 million and below $1 billion in valuation. So let's talk more about what is happening nowadays. So when you look at all those 4 companies, right, they really come and disrupt the current industry. If you look at Uber, they don't own any cars, and it's quite a small company, right? But again, a company with like less than 15,000 people, which is the same that Facebook is less than 15,000 people, and they're coming and disrupting the media industry. When you look at Alibaba, the most valuable retailer in Asia, they have only 36,000 employees, right? This is a very small company in terms of number of employees if you compare against like a Microsoft or IBM, who have more like 100 or 30,000 employees. And lastly, Airbnb is a very interesting case. If you look at this company, they have around like 4,000 or 5,000 employees, but when you benchmark them against Marriott, they are nowadays in more countries than Marriott. They have less employees than Marriott, way less. And when you look at the valuation on Airbnb compared to the market cap of Marriott, it's also very interesting. But the more interesting part is when you compare the value created per employee. And at this stage, Airbnb is creating like 30 to 50 times more than Marriott. So they just arrived a few years ago compared to Marriott. It's more like 100 years old company, but they're creating more value faster than Marriott. And also in different industries, we saw like different change, right? If you go to Walmart, you just go in, you buy your product, you leave. If you go on Kickstarter, you buy something and maybe one day you get it, because sometimes they don't really deliver the product or they get some problems. And when you look at Jet.com, initially they started as a subscription model. What is very interesting here is like Jet.com have been acquired by Walmart. So now you're getting more and more large corporates like Walmart buying tech companies. You get Unilever, who just bought Dollar Shave Club, for example. When you look at those tech companies, like the old school players like Apple or Dell, Apple is more like strong in forecasting. They forecast a lot, and then they just say, have an idea about how many people will buy those phones. Dell is slightly different. Is more like you order, and then they produce, and then they deliver. And Xiaomi in China is very interesting because they produce just a small bunch of items, for example, like 50,000 or 100,000 phones, and then they do flash sales on WeChat. So this is a very different way to sell. And when you look at the cars industry, automotive industry, like Tesla, they're moving to driverless car like Uber, but like different kind of way to do it. BlaBlaCar in Europe is mostly looking at mid-term, long-term transportation, like 200 to 500 kilometers, for example. Or Zipcar is more like you just run for 1 hour. So why this is happening is basically you get a lot of data. Those companies are collecting a huge amount of data. If you go on Uber blog, they were able to guess in Boston when you get a date, just based on where you go, where you come from, and etc. OkCupid is also able to know like a lot of things about your dating based on all the questions they're asking and all the data they're collecting. And this is possible because they have a lot of analytics and artificial intelligence now. But even if some companies doing well, some other have some struggle. If you look at Borders, they miss the ebook revolution. If you look at Blockbuster, they get the opportunity to buy Netflix, they miss it. If you look at Kodak, they invented the digital camera, but they didn't sell it. So those 3 companies are in trouble or dead now, and they get all those massive opportunities to succeed, but they just miss it. Why? Because now you get a lot of companies coming and chasing them. We call that like more death by 1,000 cuts. If you look at just the bank, this one, is you get a lot of startups coming and chasing them, and if you just look at ADM or TransferWise, both are in Europe, Netherlands and UK, respectively, and have already $1 billion in valuation each, right? So some of them are becoming quite large now and chasing those large corporate. Also happening in FMCG and also in sometimes a little bit less sexy industries like Honeywell. So any kind of corporate are getting chased by all those startups. You can find all those graphs on CB Insight website. Why this is happening now is because companies take less and less time to build $1 billion in sales. Here we're talking about sales, not about valuation, right? If you look at Dell, it took them 9 years to reach $1 billion. You look at Priceline, roughly 2 years. So competition is going faster. It's more difficult for corporate to see that coming. Before it was like, we have 10 years to see that. Now it can happen in just a few years. But also why there is more and more competition and why there is so many startups coming and chasing the large corporate is because it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to build a company. A long time ago, like in 2000, it was costing you like 5 million to start a company because you need to buy your own servers. Today, if you're a team of developers, it just costs you 5K to start. So the barrier of entry are very low now. And corporates sometimes consider that if they don't do anything wrong, we'll be fine. But if you don't move, if you don't change, if you don't challenge yourself, someone will come and kill you. So basically, this is what happened to Nokia. So we saw all this kind of thing happening, and we're wondering about what is really happening. So we partnered with INSEAD last year, and we published a report where we look after the 500 biggest corporations, and we look for each of them what they're doing with startups. So don't go through the 50 pages of the report, but I will just share with you like 10 very interesting facts that we found when we did this report. So first, when you look at DocuSign, they raised a Series E round, so very late stage round. What is very interesting? No VC money, only corporate money. Why it is interesting? 2 reasons. First, if you're a startup, maybe you don't need to talk to VC. You can get the money from the corporate. Second, if you're a VC and you do late stage investment, you need to be sure you're on those rounds. Corporate can come and take your part of the pie. Why? Because they may be a little bit less interesting about the valuation, about the return of investment. They may be more interesting about strategic value. So they're not looking at the same thing. When you look also at all those unicorns, at this time when we benchmark all the unicorns, we found out that the majority of them, in fact 61.7% of them, have raised money from corporates. And this means direct money. We don't count indirect money because a lot of those companies have raised money from VC, and those VC have received money from corporates. So if you look at direct and indirect, must be all of them have received money from corporate. And then we found out some very interesting partnership when you look at Spotify and Coca-Cola, for example. So if you're a startup and you look at Coke, you just see a beverage company, and if you're not selling to beverage company, you're like, why should I do something with them? But the thing is, you don't need to look at corporate in that way. If you're a startup, you need to look at which kind of asset this corporate can offer. And when you look at Coke, the best asset that Coke owns, I mean, at least one of the best, is the distribution. They're selling Coca-Cola and other beverage across the world in every country except 2, North Korea and Cuba. So if you want to put a Spotify logo or QR code on the can and you want to get this distributed worldwide, Coke is maybe one of the best partners. A way to validate that is just to see that they have more trucks to deliver can of Coke worldwide than UPS, DHL, and FedEx together. And when you look also, this is a bit the same story. Disney did an accelerator with Techstar, Sphero joined, they get mentorship from the CEO, and they get the opportunity to build this amazing product. What is interesting, because if you're a startup, Star Wars is maybe the biggest fan base you can access, and a lot of people will buy these products. We always talk about access to customers, but corporate can also offer access to suppliers. Is this what Orange is doing with hardware company? If you want to produce an hardware and you go to Shenzhen, if you just get 5,000 sample, will be very small for those people. If you get more, like Orange ordering maybe 1 million devices per month, then you can get a different purchase negotiation with those suppliers. Even if the R&D companies are working with startups, 9 out of 10 are doing it, in fact. And any kind of industry doing it. Here's an insurance company in China, Ping An, they're doing a venture arm. AXA doing it. Allianz is doing it also in Europe. And what is very interesting is like 23 out of the 25 biggest companies in France are working with startups. So France was the #1 country in terms of engagement with startups. Even if German company like Proceed Sat1 is offering media for equity, so you don't get cash in exchange of equity of your company, but you get access of the inventory and you're able to advertise on their channels. As I mentioned, any industry is working with startups. Like even if Diageo with Distill Ventures is doing an accelerator for beverages. So if you have an idea about the next whiskey or the next spirit, you can go there and build this kind of product. And government also doing it, even if the CIA is doing investment in startups. So this is interesting to know what they do, mostly cybersecurity, but it's quite interesting to see also government going there. And there's a lot of partnership between corporates. So for example, this fund is a partnership between 5 corporates who have the same interest. This is more like a vertical integration. They are not competitors. They go together and they invest in startup in the mobility industry. What we found out is like the majority, in fact, of those 500 biggest corporations are working with startups. And what is very interesting is the top 100 is working 2 times more than the bottom 100. So we don't know it's because our top 100 they have more money or they are more scared about being disrupted. Is why they're working more with startups. and it's maybe not why the bottom 100 is bottom 100. It's not because they don't work with startups, but there's very strong correlation, as you can see here. So we built this Swiss Army knife where we describe all the different ways that corporate can work with startups. In the report, you also get a lot of subcategories for each of them. But there's a lot of different ways. You just need to pick up what is the right way, what is the way will fit you as a corporate. And if you have a startup, it's like, what is the best way you want to engage with a corporate too. As you can see here, doesn't matter the size of the corporate, they're always doing, one thing is corporate VC, second is startup competition, and third is startup accelerators. These are the top 3 choices done by those 500 biggest corporations. And as I mentioned, France was the #1, but what is interesting is like out of the top 5 countries, 4 are in Europe. The only one who is not in Europe is Japan, and the interesting fact is US is way below all those countries. There's only 45.5% of the US company working with startups. So even if you know about Google and Microsoft, this is really an exception. Most of the US companies are not working with startups. By industry, of course, everyone knows about telecom, insurance, and bank, but also the pharma industry is working a lot with startups in different ways, but they're doing it too. They're mostly doing corporate VC, where, for example, telecom companies are mostly doing corporate investment and accelerator. In the report, we also have been a little bit deeper on 3 different cases, 3 different companies, which challenges they are facing, and how they're engaging with startups. So if you want to know more about this, we have this report with a dinosaur to represent corporate, sorry. And you can get like those 50-page report. It's very easy. You just need to drop me an email at this email address, and I'll send you a copy of the report. Thank you.